I'm using Bao Hong Academy watercolor paper for this. It's my favorite. It's very affordable. Very good watercolor paper for the price. And we're just practicing today, so I have things sectioned out into 4. I'm using aquarium salt instead of regular salt because I like the grain size. I used to have fish, and I just had this laying around, and it's a little bit bigger particle than table salt, but not so chunky as rock salt, which I tried to use once, and it did not work out so well for me. I should probably revisit that experiment after this one, though. I just wanted to do some practice landscapes in a little mini size because it's so much easier to deal with and less intimidating when you section your paper out into tiny sizes. And if you've never heard of spontaneous landscapes before, I would go look up Mind of Watercolor here on YouTube. He's really, really good at it. His are amazing. And I really want to be good at spontaneous landscape paintings, but I'm not there yet. So we're going to practice that. And I'm just doing the background first. And I'm doing all of these wet on wet to start with. Just dropping in whatever random color I kind of feel like. And most of you are probably aware of the effects you can get when you put salt on top of your watercolors before they dry, but in case you're not, it kind of sucks in some of the pigment around all of the salt particles and gives you some really cool effects. I don't seem to be able to get as dramatic of an effect as what I see other people getting, and I'm working on it, and I think I problem solved some of that here, so I'll revisit that later, and we'll see how I do. But for this one, it was a little bit disappointing. But the good news is I think I know why, so let's just play with some color here, and we'll talk about it in just a minute. This is the funnest part of any watercolor. It's just dropping color and then watching it spread out. I wish I could freeze frame that, like how it spiders out like that. When it dries, it always kind of dissipates, and I can never like get it to stay exactly like that. Maybe I need to like grab a hairdryer and blast it and dry it faster. I don't know. Just like that. I want those little veiny lines to stay exactly like that. They never do. Also, if you're like me, it's really hard to let things dry without going back in with more color way sooner than you should. So if you have more than one going at the same time, that kind of helps because you can just move on to the next one while the other 2 are drying. It's helpful. And whoops, I did not mean to do that. It was the classic dipping your brush in the wrong container. Thankfully, it wasn't like my beverage or something like that. But I just ran with it because who knows, might discover something different. And we're just practicing, we're just playing around. So it was a good time to just roll with it. And that looks pretty cool, so perhaps our mistakes have paid off. I don't know, we'll see. And now I really did have to just set it aside and let it dry. But this is what I got so far. Just the background, so I didn't want the colors to be too bold because then it'd be really hard to paint over them. The salt kind of sticks to the paper because of the paint, so you kind of have to work to brush it off. I ended up finally figuring out that I should just grab a card and scrape it off. And then I found out that was not dry. It was still wet. Go figure. And look how pretty that is. That looks good enough to eat. Don't eat it. Don't do that. Now I want to try to add the background trees, and I like having the color kind of disperse into the wet parts, so I painted on the hills that I wanted just with water at first, and then started right above that water line with the color for the faraway tops of trees, and just kind of let the color kind of fall down into that water line. And that is part of the second thing that I think I messed up here, not using enough paint. So it looks okay, but when this is all said and done, I do think that I should probably start using wet watercolors instead of just from the pan, which I've been avoiding doing because I have paints that kind of are a little bit pricey and I don't have the money to just keep buying more all the time. And I'm really afraid that if I just squeeze it out of the tube, even though you can just let it dry and use it again later, initially I'm kind of afraid of just using too much and wasting it, which I probably need to get over. But it's a little scary when you're using really good paint and you don't have a lot of money to just keep replacing it. So I'm still just using it right out of the pan. I probably should spray my palette down with water first though, and like really let it soak up a lot of water so that I can load my brush up with a lot more paint. Watercolor dries a few shades lighter anyhow, so what you see sometimes can look really strong, and then you look at it later when it's all completely dry and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I needed a little bit more pigment there. So you can already see right there when I do manage to get more paint on my brush and it flows into where the paper is still wet, like it just looks so much nicer. So the whole idea of spontaneous landscapes is to not plan out your painting, but to let it happen more intuitively, and especially in watercolor, to just let the paint do its thing and to let go of controlling it. So you would usually start just by laying down some color in a kind of abstract way and letting it move and flow. And if you just relax and just watch it dry, you can start to pick out these little areas where maybe, oh, that looks like a hill and that already looks like branches or rocks. And you could just start to paint the rest of those details in and build on that. I think I already went against that a little bit too much because I knew I just wanted to paint some colorful pine tree silhouettes all over these, so who's surprised, really? I like the way that yellow turned out on top of there. I think that's cadmium yellow deep, but it's a little bit more of an opaque watercolor, so it covers up the background a little bit more. Just popped real nice, looked real nice. So of all the backgrounds of these 4 paintings that I did, this one turned out closest to how I kind of envisioned when I used the salt. Maybe it's because of the happy accident I had where I just really plopped a lot of salt down on there. But I think mostly it was using more pigment. When I dropped in that, I think it's a French ultramarine blue, when I dropped that in, it was a lot more pigment than any other ones. And also, my paper on all 4 of these was really, really wet when I put the salt down. And I think it was just way too wet. It's so hard to wait for the paper to be the dampness that it needs to be to do what you're trying to do and to like learn what that wetness and dampness should be. It's like a real trial and error. So I think what I really do need to do, and maybe for another video, is to just lay out all different examples of really wet versus really just slightly damp paper with lots of color on it, and just really see the difference between a lot of salt, a little bit of salt, chunky salt, table salt, how wet is the paper, blah, blah, blah. That's the best way to learn, right? So it sounds like a big chore to really lay out all of that and tape it all off and get it done, but I'm going to do it because I'm really, really tired of looking at other people's really dramatic, amazing watercolor effects with salt and getting really kind of just ones with mine. I don't know. I'm going to figure it out, guys. I'm going to figure it out. Those blue trees on the left look a little unhinged. They're a little squiggly. They look like they maybe like survived a blight, but at what cost, you know? That's okay though. These are fantasy landscape paintings. They can be as weird or as natural looking as we want. Oops, I made a blob. I gotta fix that. Let's just go back and fix that one. I think that right there is a good amount of pigment to drop into that water to get a nice effect. Granted, the rest of it's background, so it's not supposed to be really dark like that. So maybe it's, maybe I'm just beating myself up, being a little bit too hard on myself probably. So you're probably doing that to yourself too. Maybe we just need to chill out. I think one of the biggest things I notice when I do this is when I do go back and watch myself paint things again, I do notice a lot of things that I like that I didn't notice liking before. Like I kind of come back to it a little gentler, a little kinder to myself. I think you just need that distance, from your own stuff. There's a lot of times where I paint something and I put it away for a few days and then I come back and look at it and go, oh, okay, maybe I do like that. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. That's probably just the time we need to forget what your intentions were, so that you can kind of come back to it and just accept what is. And you'd think I would have learned by now, but I haven't, that this paper is too wet to do the scratchy card thing. I'll learn eventually. It did work better on this side though, because I have, more pigment. It shows up more and you can drag it out. So it still looks pretty cool over here. But overall, it's just too wet. I need to have patience. I need to wait. Another thing about this fourth one is that despite it being my favorite background, I still covered it up like a big dummy. Go figure. Especially on the left over there. But I do like that it kind of has like a night sky look to it almost. It's kind of like cool nebula thing going on in the background. I might have to recreate that on purpose in the future. Trying again with the cut up gift card. It's fine. It worked fine. For those who don't know, if you take like an old credit card or gift card or something and cut it up, you can kind of scratch into the surface of your paper. If the water's a little bit wet, it doesn't drag out as well, but you do get these lines where the paint kind of flows into, so you can kind of get these darker lines like that. If the paint's a little bit drier and you have more paint on the paper, like I should have, you can get like really dramatic sort of grasses and branches and stuff that way. So it's fun to play with. It looks pretty cool in the foreground there. I was intentionally trying to use more paint, so I think it worked better up there. Now that is a good amount of pigment to drop into some water. That looks really cool. I like how that came out. I think this one turned out to be my favorite foreground of all of them, if I'm remembering correctly. decided to try again with the salt in the foreground here. It's way too wet. The paper's way too wet. I think that's my problem. Obviously, I have to do a lot of experimenting to really get the hang of it, but just looking at it, it just looks way too wet. It still turns out okay in the end, but it's not what I'm envisioning. I love how the paint on this is bleeding out and kind of going to the right a little bit. It's almost looks like they're sloping downhill, like there's shadows behind them all, like they're painting their own shadows. It's really cool. If only you could do those things on purpose instead of by accident, but it's exciting when it happens on accident, so there's that. Never seems to work out when I'm trying to do it on purpose, though, so far anyway. Maybe after a few more years of watercolor experience under my belt, then maybe I'll be able to do it on purpose every time. I don't know. We'll see. Adding more salt again. It does give an effect. I mean, just because the paper's really wet doesn't mean the salt's not going to do anything. It gives it kind of like almost like a tie-dye effect where you get these sort of dark veins of color that kind of push out. So it's not like it's not doing anything. It's just not doing what I wanted. I'm a big baby about it. That being said, don't get me wrong, I do like these. I think they came out fun. These would be fun for, just like little cards for friends or something like that, or to send us thank you cards. And it's really simple to do. You can do that. You can definitely do this yourself at home too. So let's go over what I think would improve it for the next time I do this, and that would be finding the patience to let the paper get a little bit drier, just a little bit drier before I put a bunch of salt down, number one. Number two is to not be scared to use more pigment, straight out of the tube probably. I need to do that. I don't think I've ever done that. Not for years anyway, and when I did, it was not good watercolor. It was not pigmented. So that's a need to do thing for sure. But mostly, I think the biggest takeaway is for me to lighten the fuck up, because these look fun. These were fun and they look super cool. And look, I didn't get the dramatic salt results that I wanted. My results were a lot more subtle, but not bad. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. So I have some homework to do, and that's a good thing. We're gonna learn. I'm gonna do some playing with that on my own behind the scenes, and I will report back. In the meantime, if you stuck around to the end, thank you. I really, really, really do appreciate you. I don't know whether or not I always should speed up the painting or just let it be real time, so we'll do a mix, because some people like one thing, some people like the other, and you can't please everyone all the time. So this was a slow one. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you sit down and play with spontaneous landscapes and play with some salt and get some awesome results. And if you don't get some awesome results, it's okay. You're going to do some more later. It's going to be fine. We're okay. You're doing way better than you think you are, I promise you. I think these look pretty neat. Tell me which one is your favorite. I'm going to take what I learned and I'm going to go experiment, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!